Welcome to Audit the Audit, where we sort out the who and what and the right and wrong of police interactions. This episode covers the right to privacy, officer identification, and interfering, and is brought to us by Al KTL's channel. Be sure to check out the description below and give them the credit that they deserve. Sometime around June 9th, 2020, the First Amendment auditor known as Al KTL, who I will refer to as Mr. K, was filming a traffic stop from a public sidewalk in the city of Revere, Massachusetts. Once the stop was concluded, Mr. K approached the vehicle that had been detained to inquire about the reason he was stopped. The driver answered Mr. K's questions, and Mr. K politely thanked the citizen before moving on to continue recording the officers. The driver then circled his vehicle back to one of the officers and informed him that he did not want to be filmed by Mr. K. The driver then left the scene, and Officer Dave Wilson confronted Mr. K.
How you doing?
Good, yourself?
He's a civilian. He's choosing to not be videotaped. You have to stop videotaping him. He's a civilian. You can videotape me all you want, but he does not want to be videotaped. It's not an option for you.
You're wrong.
Pardon me?
You're wrong.
No. He's a civilian. He doesn't want any part of it. That's what he just expressed to me. I'm not wrong. I know the law. You're welcome to videotape me. You cannot videotape him or his license plate.
Officer Wilson tells Mr. K he can't film a citizen who doesn't want to be filmed, but the courts have long disagreed with the officer's statement. In the 2011 case of Glick versus Cuniff, the First District Court of Appeals determined that the filming of government officials engaged in their duties in a public place, including police officers performing their responsibilities, is protected by the First Amendment. In 2014, the same court clarified that filming a traffic stop is also protected First Amendment activity in the case of Gerke versus Begin. As we've discussed many times on ATA, individuals have no expectation of privacy in public places. This means that a citizen can film any other citizen in a public place, regardless of whether that individual would like to be filmed. The history behind the idea of public expectations of privacy involves the interplay between two constitutional rights, the right to privacy and the right to freedom of speech. While an individual's right to privacy is not explicitly mentioned in the Constitution, U.S. courts have consistently recognized this right. The Supreme Court officially recognized the right to privacy in 1965 in the case of Griswold versus Connecticut. In this case, the court concluded that a constitutional right to privacy was found in the penumbra, more commonly known as a shadow, cast by the First, Third, Fourth, Fifth, and Ninth Amendments. The decision explained that these amendments created various zones of privacy that must be protected in order to guarantee the specific rights listed in the Constitution. For example, the First Amendment does not explicitly list a right to intimate association, which is the freedom of individuals to maintain close private relationships without government interference. But if a right to intimate association was not protected, it would impact the right to assemble and freedom of speech, which are explicitly protected by the amendment. Based on this idea of implied rights, the Griswold decision held that a constitutionally protected right to be left alone, otherwise known as a right to privacy, exists. However, this right to privacy must be balanced against other constitutional rights, such as the First Amendment right to freedom of speech. Balancing these two rights involves deciding how much of an expectation of privacy an individual has in specific places. For example, the expectation of privacy is strongest in your own home. In contrast, there is little to no expectation of privacy in public. In a 1971 landmark case of Cohen versus California, the Supreme Court held that the privacy concerns of individuals in public were outweighed by the First Amendment right to freedom of speech. Because individuals generally have no expectation of privacy in a public place, freedom of speech, such as the auditor's act of filming in this video, will almost always be protected.
You're wrong. I can videotape him and I can videotape you.
No, he's a civilian.
What does that mean?
He's a private human being.
So what does that mean?
What do you mean, what does that mean? Have a good day. Carry on.
Why don't you have a good day? There is no... Who? Did you just call me a loser? Did you just call me a loser? What's your name and badge number? Did you just call me a loser?
License and registration, please. What's your ID?
Did you just call me a loser?
You just approached the cruiser after I asked you not to. Do you have an ID on you, please, sir?
Did you just call me a loser?
Do you have an ID on you, sir?
Sir, can you call your supervisor?
I already have.
Okay,
Listen, you're very close.
I'll wait for him.
You should not walk up to police vehicles.
Why are you walking up to me?
After the auditor approaches the police vehicle, Officer Wilson gets out of the vehicle and demands the auditor's identification, despite having no reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed. There is no law prohibiting citizens from approaching police vehicles. While Officer Wilson accuses the auditor of approaching the vehicle after being asked not to, the video shows that he never told the auditor not to approach. Therefore, there is no evidence that the auditor violated an order. Not only is Officer Wilson's demand for identification unwarranted in the situation, but it also sets a dangerous precedent. If the act of approaching an officer's vehicle was criminalized, it would severely limit citizens' ability to communicate with the police. Crime victims could even be arrested for seeking help from officers parked nearby.
I'm asking you for your ID.
6 feet, sir. You don't even have a mask on. You're putting my life in jeopardy, sir. Keep 6 feet away. Thank you, sir. Why are you approaching me?
Lower your camera. You're welcome to videotape me, but civilians don't have to be videotaped.
We'll see when your supervisor gets here. Why you keep approaching me?
He's heading out into traffic. I'm gonna have to detain him if he heads out into traffic.
This is a public easement. This is a public easement right here. So I could be right here. Can't detain me. For what? For asking, you can just call me a loser. I have it on camera.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Well, I have it on camera.
That's good for you. That's
Can
a
you
productive
identify
use of
yourself?
time. That civilian chooses to not be videotaped.
Can you identify yourself?
That's absolutely not. You have no lawful business here. You're not.
Can you identify yourself?
Absolutely not. Can you identify yourself?
Chapter 41, Section 98D states that upon lawful order, you must identify.
Upon lawful order, and
Yes.
you're giving me a lawful order.
Yes.
Yeah, no, nice try though.
The auditor requests that Officer Wilson identify himself, and Officer Wilson refuses to do so. Despite Officer Wilson's contention otherwise, Massachusetts law requires officers to identify themselves to individuals who request their identification. The auditor cites to Chapter 41, Section 98D of the Massachusetts General Laws, which requires every full-time police officer in the state to carry a department-issued identification card that includes the officer's photograph and identifying information. Title 501 of the Code of Massachusetts Regulations, Section 15.02, defines a full-time police officer as one who is employed at least 20 hours per week on average. The law also requires that the identification card be carried on the officer's person and be exhibited upon lawful request for purposes of identification. While Officer Wilson tells the auditor that his request for identification is not lawful, the Revere Police Department disagreed. Although the department's policies are not publicly available, after reviewing this video, the department posted on its public Facebook page that several department policies were violated. The post also stated, quote, "Officers are required to give their name and badge number to a citizen, as it is a lawful request. There is no expectation of privacy when filming in a public place."
It's a nice try. Google works well for you. I'd try that.
Didn't work out for you. Where's
Again,
your badge, sir?
what is your
How come
lawful
you're not
purpose?
dispatched?
You're interfering with a motor vehicle stop. He didn't want to be videotaped. That's his prerogative. He's a civilian. You can videotape me. You cannot videotape him.
Okay, we'll see about that. So now we have an unmarked vehicle.
You may not videotape civilians who don't want to be videotaped.
The guy is gone, so there's no...
Well,
no...
he expressed to me he does not want to be videotaped.
Alright. Can you stop approaching me? Can you stop
Pardon me?
walking behind me?
Pardon me?
Don't be in my traffic, sir. Sir, back up. Go,
You did say it's a right of way, right? A public way, and I can
yeah,
go
but
anywhere I
you're
want?
blocking me. Sir, can you have him back up? I'm fearing for my life.
Again, you're interfering
Look
with a
what
motor
he's-
vehicle
look
stop.
what- is this what policemen
You
do?
have no business on that motor vehicle stop. No lawful business. You are interfering with a motor vehicle stop.
He's a police officer. You have to comply with the police officer.
Comply? He's blocking my walk, my freeway to walk.
I have a
stopped
free- I can
you.
walk
He
He didn't
anywhere.
stop me.
To inquire the situation. You're not complying with him.
What are you
He's a-
talking about?
he's
You
a
weren't
police
even here.
officer.
I'll wait for the supervisor. Wow, nothing to do in Revere? I'll wait for the
Civilian
supervisor.
does not want to be videotaped. You cannot videotape him. It's illegal.
What law is that? Can you state the law? That I can't.
Pardon me? Can I
you
state the law? No, I don't have to state the law. I can tell you
You
that.
don't know
can
it. It doesn't
videotape.
exist.
What happened?
He does not want to be videotaped. He pulled up and asked me. He said, please have him remove me from that video. I do not want to be videotaped.
Okay.
That's his lawful business.
So what are you saying?
I'm trying to impart to you that you need to delete that application. He was not, it was a lawful motor vehicle stop and he chose to not be videotaped.
Is there a victim here? How's this work?
Again, I have no idea who he is. Just walked up and interfered with a motor vehicle stop.
I know exactly who he is. I know exactly who.
Just chose to interfere with a motor vehicle stop. The gentleman in the motor vehicle stop did not want to be videotaped. He expressed that. He was very articulate about it.
You lawfully could be arrested for interfering, right? You know that?
How did I interfere?
The officers tell the auditor that he could be arrested for interfering with a motor vehicle stop because he filmed it. Simply recording police interactions is not interfering with police activity. In Massachusetts, interference with the lawful duties of a police officer is a common law crime, which means that no statute specifically prohibits it. Part 2, Chapter 6, Article 6 of the Massachusetts Constitution provides that the laws that existed before the Constitution's 1780 adoption were preserved and continued and remain in full force until altered or repealed by the legislature. Since interference with a police officer's lawful duties was a crime in 1780, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court concluded in a 2019 case called Commonwealth v. Adams that interference with the lawful duties of a police officer is still a crime. In addition to recognizing this offense, the decision also stressed that this offense was subject to carefully constructed limitations to avoid criminalizing constitutionally protected activities, such as the auditor's filming of the traffic stop. To protect these activities, the court clearly and narrowly defined what constitutes an interference with a police officer's lawful duties. The decision stated that an individual must either physically obstruct or hinder the officer in the performance of the duty or threaten violence against the officer in a way that would obstruct or hinder the officer in the performance of the duty. The individual must also intend to obstruct or hinder the officer in the performance of that duty. Here, the auditor does not physically interfere with the traffic stop or make any threats of violence towards the officers. He simply engages in the constitutionally protected activity of recording a traffic stop, and does so from a distance.
How did I interfere? Explain that to me. How did I interfere? Explain to me, how did I interfere?
He asked not to be videotaped, very respectfully.
That is not allowed. There is no expectation of privacy in public, sir. You're totally wrong.
You're videotaping a civilian.
You are totally wrong. See, there's a camera right there.
Doesn't matter. What's the big deal? Are you enjoying this?
What are you talking about? Wow, there must be no crime in the Revere to have 7. Why don't you go home? Why don't you go home? Trust me, I'm going to be here before you until you leave. All y'all gonna leave before I do.
After exchanging several choice words, the officers eventually left the scene and Mr. K was allowed to continue recording without further incident. Following the encounter, Mr. K went to the Revere Police Department to file a complaint against the officers, but Lieutenant Duchault refused to allow him to file a formal complaint and insisted that the only disciplinary action that would be taken would be in the form of informal reprimand. Mr. K left the department without being allowed to speak to anyone from internal affairs. After the video was posted to YouTube, the department was flooded with calls and emails from concerned citizens, and the department went on to release a statement via Facebook confirming that an investigation into the incident was underway and encouraging citizens to contact the department if they witnessed misconduct. The department later updated the statement and admitted that several policy violations had occurred during the encounter, and ensuring the public that Revere Police Chief James R. Guido had taken disciplinary action against officers involved. Overall, Officer Wilson and the Revere Police Department get an F for displaying a fundamental misunderstanding of the First Amendment, maintaining a hostile and confrontational attitude throughout the encounter, and for threatening Mr. K with arrest when he had not committed any crimes. This interaction was perhaps one of the most egregious displays of constitutional ignorance I have covered on this channel, and it is difficult to understand how Officer Wilson was not terminated for his conduct. Not only was Officer Wilson's conduct a clear attempt to violate Mr. K's constitutional rights, but the officer's refusal to identify himself literally violated the law. The department's response to the situation was far from adequate, and their refusal to take appropriate action against the officers involved is contrary to the message they attempted to convey in their statement. What the department proved in their statement was that officers who break the law and intimidate citizens will be allowed to continue serving on the force, even when they display grossly incompetent behavior. There is absolutely no excuse for Officer Wilson's conduct, and the department's complacency will only serve to exacerbate this type of behavior from other officers. If there were a lower grade than an F on the ATA grading scale, then it would certainly apply in this encounter. And Officer Wilson and the Revere Police Department represent everything that is wrong with the paradigm of American policing. Mr. K gets an A-, because although he could have invoked his right to remain silent more effectively, he remained relatively calm and collected throughout the encounter, refused to back down from Officer Wilson's intimidation, and invoked his rights accurately and appropriately. At no point during this interaction did Mr. K commit a crime, but that did not stop Officer Wilson from attempting to criminalize everything Mr. K did. Mr. K seemed very well informed of his rights and the laws of his state, and it is safe to assume that he did his due diligence before conducting this audit. Mr. K also made a legitimate effort to follow the proper channels for filing a complaint, and was utterly shut down. And it is interesting that the department failed to acknowledge that part of the interaction. As mentioned before, there were moments where Mr. K could have invoked his right to remain silent, but considering Officer Wilson's conduct, it's easy to see why that was difficult to do. I commend Mr. K for displaying an intimate understanding of his state's laws and handling this encounter tactfully. I highly recommend giving Mr. K's channel your support. You can find a link in the description below. Let us know if there is an interaction or legal topic you would like us to discuss in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more police interaction content.